Schizofenik's Characterpedia. Count Dracula. This video will explore Bram Stoker's popular fictional character, Count Dracula, the centuries-old vampire, sorcerer, and nobleman who ruled over his castle. Origins and history. Born in Transylvania during 1431, Count Dracula was initially a valiant soldier, wealthy statesman, and highly skilled alchemist. His knowledge of alchemy was attained while studying the black arts in the Carpathian Mountains. However, he would later take up arms to lead his troops against the Turkish forces. At some point after his death, Dracula would return from the tomb of his castle chapel as a vampire. In this form, Dracula would reside for several centuries within his castle with 3 female vampires known as the Brides of Dracula. Despite bearing a resemblance to the Count, it is unknown if his relationship with these women were of an incestuous nature. Physical appearance. Dracula's physical appearance seems to be formed from a series of juxtapositions, blurring sexual, racial, and class boundaries. He simultaneously possesses both Western and Eastern features, yet despite belonging to the aristocracy, he could also socialise with homeless vagrants. The Count was portrayed as being thin, having an aquiline nose, pale complexion, pointed ears, sharp teeth, a long white moustache and thick eyebrows, which were stereotypical of Gothic villains. Furthermore, Dracula had hair growing from his palms and seemed older in appearance. Despite this, he seemed to adopt a more youthful appearance as the novel progressed, and Jonathan Harker observed that Dracula's reflection was not visible in the mirror, suggesting an intangible existence. Personality traits. Count Dracula's charming and cordial persona seemed to attract the attention of women, which is clearly part of his masquerade, as the fairer sex were his preferred victims. However, the Count would also act in a friendly and hospitable manner towards Jonathan Harker, which initially charmed the young solicitor. However, despite rescuing Harker from the clutches of his 3 bloodthirsty brides, Dracula only wished to keep him alive until his legal transaction was completed in England. Ultimately, the Count was an incredibly cunning individual. Intelligence. Despite his bloodthirsty ways, Dracula was described as an expert scholar with immense knowledge in many scientific fields, including alchemy and a form of dark magic from the Carpathian Mountains taught by the devil himself. He also had an encyclopedic knowledge of history, perhaps due to his own longevity, and had developed immense cunning and wisdom throughout the centuries. Powers and abilities. It is argued that Count Dracula obtained his supernatural abilities after making a deal with the devil. Some of his capabilities included superhuman strength to the equivalent of 20 men, an immunity to conventional methods of attack, superhuman agility and levitation, the ability to vanish and reappear at will, hypnotic, telepathic, and illusionary abilities, command over animals like rats, owls, bats, moths, foxes, and wolves. Weather manipulation, such as conjuring storms and mists. Shape-shifting capabilities. Dracula can morph into a bat, wolf, or mist, as well as travel as elemental dust within the moon's rays. Vampirism. One of Dracula's primary abilities is to turn others into vampires by biting them. Although this bite does not kill his victims, it does increase his influence and hypnotic power over them. Despite this, these victims can eventually succumb to blood loss, only to reanimate as vampires and perform Dracula's bidding. Bloodletting. Dracula requires no other sustenance but fresh human blood, which rejuvenates him and allows him to grow younger. The vampire's baptism of blood. Often considered the king vampire, Dracula can control other vampires. In a process known as the vampire's baptism of blood, he forces his victims to drink his blood, thus turning them into vampires and gaining a telepathic link with his subjects. Weaknesses. Slaying the beast. Dracula is less formidable in daylight and is only able to shift his form at dawn, noon, and dusk. Although the sun is not fatal to him, most of his abilities do cease. Furthermore, He is also limited in his ability to travel, as he can only cross running water at low or high tide. Due to this, he cannot fly across a river in the form of a bat or mist, or even step off a boat and onto a dock, unless he is physically carried over with assistance. Additionally, Dracula is unable to enter a place unless invited to do so by someone of the household, or even a visitor. However, once invited, he can enter and leave the premises at will. There are items which greatly diminish Dracula's powers and even cause him severe harm. He is repulsed by garlic as well as sacramental bread. Other sacred items and symbols such as crucifixes also have an adverse effect on Dracula. Placing the branch of a wild rose upon the top of his coffin can also prevent him escaping. In addition to this, firing a sacred bullet into the coffin can ensure that he remains true dead. A physical state known as the death sleep is also a period when Dracula is vulnerable. This occurs at daytime as Dracula sleeps open-eyed and is completely inactive and unaware of his surroundings. Despite this, Dracula can perform some activities during daylight and is not completely bound by darkness. In order to recover his strength, Dracula requires the presence of Transylvanian soil when in a foreign land. This weakness forced him to transport many boxes of Transylvanian earth to his multiple residences in London. Enemies. One of Dracula's most formidable opponents is Abraham Van Helsing, the iconic vampire hunter. Significant moments. His voyage to Whitby. The Count sailed the seas on board a Russian ship named the Demeter as he travelled to Whitby, a coastal town in northern England. During this voyage, Dracula's reign of terror would begin as he sustained himself from the ship's crew members, leaving only the body of the captain behind, who was discovered bound upon the ship's helm. Subsequently, the captain's log revealed the harrowing events that had taken place during the ship's journey. Dracula evaded capture by leaving the ship in the form of a wolf, expanding his realm. During the late 19th century, Dracula began his elaborate plan for world domination. He initially infiltrated London, England, where his master plan would unfold. Ultimately, Dracula failed when he was thwarted and destroyed by Van Helsing's vampire hunters. Stalking Lucy Westenra. After arriving in Whitby, Dracula commenced stalking Lucy within her bedchamber during the night. The young woman would become ill due to blood loss as she fell under the Count's control. Eventually, she would rise from the dead as a vampire, but was killed by a group of men led by Van Helsing, who entered her crypt and destroyed her reanimated corpse. Attacking Mina Harker. Count Dracula would secretly attack Mina on 3 occasions, drinking her blood each time and forcing Mina to drink his on the final visit. Mina was destined to see the same fate as Lucy until the Count was killed. The death of Count Dracula. A small group of men led by Abraham Van Helsing would discover the Count's earth boxes and place wafers of sacramental bread inside of them, rendering them useless to Dracula. After attempting to trap the Count within his Piccadilly home, Van Helsing would exploit Mina's psychic connection to Dracula and tracked him back to Transylvania. Together, these vampire hunters would eliminate the brides of Dracula before Jonathan Harker and Quincy Morris destroyed the Count himself. Despite being fatally wounded by the Count, Quincy's blade is what slew Dracula as he was stabbed in the heart. This file terminates here. End sequence.